The name that history remembers is Bloody Bill Anderson. But long before the war, long before the fear, there was only a boy named William. He was born around the year 1838, somewhere between the hills of Kentucky and the rough edge of Missouri. The land was wide, with small farms, dirt roads and cabins made of rough wood. Life was hard, but it was simple. People worked the fields, traded in town, and tried to mind their own business. No one knew that one of the most feared men of the Civil War was growing up among them. As a child, William T. Anderson watched the world very closely. He saw how strong men could be brought down by debt, bad weather, or a gun. He learned early that the land did not forgive weakness. His father worked as a hat maker and small trader. His mother tried to keep peace at home. They were not rich, they were not powerful. They were only one more family trying to survive on a restless border. That border world shaped him. In those days, people in the same town could have very different beliefs. Some loved the Union, others loved the South. Many did not care about flags at all. They only cared about their land, their family, and who might try to take those things away. Anger grew under the surface like fire under dry grass. When William was still young, the family moved west, closer to Kansas and Missouri. The move was not just for adventure. His father hoped for better trade and better land. But the farther they went, the rougher life became. Out on the edge, the law was thin. A man's safety often depended on how fast he could draw a gun, or how many friends would ride with him. The boy saw men argue in the street and reach for their pistols. He saw horses stolen in the night. He heard stories whispered in the dark about gangs, raids, and men found dead by the road. Slowly, violence began to feel normal to him. It was not a shock. It was part of the world. William was not a gentle boy. He learned to ride hard and shoot straight. He liked speed, danger, and the feeling of power a gun could give. Some neighbors said that he and his brother Jim were troubled long before the war. They were accused of stealing horses and getting into fights. Whether every story was true or not, one thing was clear. The Anderson boys were growing into men who knew how to live outside the rules. The land itself pushed them in that direction. Kansas and Missouri were called the border, but they were also a line of fire. Long before the Civil War officially began, people there were already fighting what some called a small private war. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery groups raided each other's homes. Cabins were burned. Families were driven off their land. The law could not keep up, and often did not even try. William watched all this. He saw that sometimes the side with the gun and the will to use it was the side that won, no matter what the law said. He saw that men who hesitated could lose everything in one night. This lesson dug deep into him. There is a story told about William as a young man. One day he met a Native American from the Core tribe near Council Grove in Kansas. Later, the tribesman was found dead, and William said the man had tried to rob him. Some believed him, others did not. But the story shows how close he already was to deadly violence, even before soldiers and uniforms entered his life. At home, the Anderson family talked like many Southern-leaning families did. His father had strong Southern feelings. He did not trust the growing power of the North. He did not like the idea of outsiders telling him how to live or what to believe. These thoughts rolled around the dinner table, in the workshop, on the porch in the evenings. William listened. He learned which neighbors could be trusted and which could not. He learned that words like Union and South were more than politics. They were reasons to hate or to fight. Still, in those early years, William could have become many different things. He might have stayed a small-time outlaw. He might have settled down as a tough farmer, known for a quick temper but nothing more. History was not yet fixed. It waited. What would decide his path was not just the land or the politics. It would be loss. Deep, personal loss. By the late 1850s, the air in Kansas and Missouri felt tight, like a room filled with smoke before flames burst out. Men formed bands to protect their own people. Others formed bands to attack. Whoever set out first could call themselves heroes. The ones who struck back were called criminals. The lines were already blurred. William learned to move between those lines. He knew how to speak like a neighbor and think like a fighter. He could be charming when he wanted to be, and cold when he needed to be. The boy from Kentucky had become a young man of the border, shaped by dust, anger, and the sound of distant gunfire. The world outside his family was changing fast. In the East, leaders gave speeches. In Washington, men argued in halls of power. But out where William lived, the coming war was not about speeches. It was about who would ride into whose town at night. It was about who would be left standing in the morning. The Anderson family, like many others, tried to live through the storm by keeping to themselves. But it was not easy. Every trade, every journey, every visit to town carried risk. The wrong word in front of the wrong man could mark a person as an enemy, and on the border, enemies did not live long. In this world, William's heart grew hard. He trusted his brothers. He trusted a few close friends. Beyond that small circle, everyone else was a possible threat. He did not know it yet, but the war that was coming would offer him something powerful. It would give him a cause that matched his anger. It would give him a flag to ride under, and it would give him a reason to turn his private violence into something even darker. Before the first shot of the Civil War was fired, William Anderson already knew the taste of blood. He already knew the sound of a man falling. He already knew that revenge felt, for a moment, like justice. Soon, a single event would break whatever was left of the boy inside him. Soon the world would no longer know him as William. It would know him as Bloody Bill. And that story begins when death rides straight into his family. Before the world feared the name Bloody Bill Anderson, there was a moment when William still had a chance to turn away from violence. He could have left the border, settled somewhere far, and tried to forget the gunshots and the burning farms. But life is not always shaped by dreams. Sometimes, it is shaped by a single moment so painful that it changes a person forever. For William Anderson, that moment came in 1862, the year his world collapsed. The Anderson family lived near Council Grove in Kansas, trying to stay alive in a land where danger waited behind every door. The war had begun. Neighbors watched neighbors with suspicion. Horsemen rode at night. Many families chose a side not because they wanted war but because war came to them. William's father, William Sr., was a Southern sympathizer. He believed the federal government had no right to force its will on states. He believed a man should protect his land, his family, and his freedom. Those views were enough to make him a target in Kansas, a place where pro-union supporters were strong and growing stronger every day. One day, a dispute began between William's father and a local judge who supported the Union. No one knows the exact words spoken. Some said it started over trade disagreements. Others said it was about threats and land. But one fact remains clear. The argument ended with a gun, and the father of William Anderson lay dead. News travels fast in a small frontier town. It rushed across Kansas like a cold wind. When William heard that his father had been shot, witnesses said his face changed. The sorrow did not come in tears. It came in silence. It came like a storm building behind his eyes. The man who killed his father believed the law would protect him. But the border was not a place of calm courts and fair trials. It was a place where justice often rode on horseback. William did not call for a judge. He did not gather witnesses. He gathered his brother Jim and a few trusted friends. They saddled their horses and rode out. Some said they tracked the judge for days. Some said only hours. But when they found him, the world was quiet. William faced the man. The judge tried to speak, but William raised his gun. There was no long argument. There were no speeches. A single shot answered the death of his father. Justice, in William's eyes, was now paid for with blood. That day, a line was crossed. He could not stay near Council Grove after that. Too many enemies, too many eyes watching, too many men who would want revenge of their own. William, Jim, and the rest of the family packed what they could and left Kansas behind. They rode into western Missouri, a place already known for hard riders and hidden war. There he found something that fit him too well. He found guerrilla fighters. The Civil War in Missouri was unlike the battles in the East. There were no huge armies marching in neat lines, no famous generals giving orders from maps. Missouri was a shadow war, a war of night riders, ambushes, and raids. People started calling these fighters bushwhackers. They did not fight in uniform. They did not fight by rules. They fought for survival, revenge, or belief. William Anderson understood that world. It reached into the darkest place inside him and answered the loss he carried. When he saw men preparing for raids, he did not hesitate. He joined them at first. He rode with smaller bands. They raided Union supply wagons, cut telegraph lines, and struck where the enemy did not expect. William proved himself useful. He could ride hard, shoot fast, and keep his nerves steady, even when bullets cut through tree branches around his head. But it was not only skill that made other fighters notice him. It was the look in his eyes, a look that said the war was not just politics to him. It was personal. And on the Missouri border, personal was powerful. As word spread of his ability, William Anderson was invited to ride with one of the most feared guerrilla leaders in the war. His name was William Clark Quantrill. Quantrill's men burned towns, cut down Union soldiers in ambush, and disappeared before the army could strike back. Their actions created legends, and their names were spoken like warnings around Union campfires. Men who rode with Quantrill would later become some of the most famous outlaws in American history, including Jesse James and Frank James. But even among such ruthless company, William Anderson began to stand out. He had lost more than land. He had lost more than safety. He had lost his father and the part of himself that could forgive. He rode with purpose, not for money, not even for the Confederate cause alone. He rode for vengeance, and vengeance makes a man dangerous. William Anderson was not a loud man. He did not shout orders the way some leaders did. He spoke in few words, but when he did, men listened. He made decisions quickly. He trusted only a small circle, and he learned that fear could be a weapon stronger than any pistol. Stories began to spread about him, some true, some not, but all of them fed a growing legend. They said he would ride through gunfire without blinking. They said he never forgot a face. They said he kept a list of men who would die by his hand, and whether the stories were real or not, they had power. Union soldiers began to speak his name with caution. William Anderson, Bill Anderson, and soon, something darker. Bloody Bill. Every raid pushed him further from the young man he once was. The border war was shaping him, carving him like stone, turning him into a leader of men whose hearts also carried hate. But hate is a fire that does not know when to stop burning. It eats through everything, even the person who feeds it. Those who watched him during this time said something strange. When the shooting started, when men screamed or horses fell, Bill Anderson did not seem shaken. Some said he was becoming a man who felt nothing. Some said he felt too much. Some said he was beginning to enjoy the killing. The truth may never be known, but everyone agreed on one thing. William Anderson was no longer just a rider in the war. He was becoming a force inside it. Missouri and Kansas changed everyone who fought there. The war twisted brother against brother, neighbor against neighbor. When a man's family was threatened, the rules of honor and mercy burned away. William Anderson carried that border inside him. It shaped his choices. It sharpened his anger, and soon it would rewrite his name in history. The boy who once rode across quiet fields was gone. The man who replaced him would become one of the most feared guerrilla leaders of the Civil War, and the world would come to know him by a name that echoed like a warning in the night. Bloody Bill Anderson. The war on the border was changing William Anderson fast. The quiet boy from Kentucky was gone. The young man who once only watched violence was now part of it. He rode with Quantrill's guerrillas through the woods and hills of Missouri. They did not wear bright uniforms or march in straight lines. They dressed like farmers, ranch hands, or simple riders. But each man carried guns, knives, and a hard look in his eyes. Their war was not like the big battles in the newspapers. Their war was in the shadows. They waited on lonely roads for Union patrols. They watched small towns and camps. They struck when no one was ready. William rode in the middle of this new life as if he had been born for it. He learned how to move silently through thick trees. He learned how to study tracks in the dust. He learned how to hear danger before most men even felt it. In small raids he proved himself again and again. When bullets started flying, he did not freeze. He moved forward. He aimed carefully. He fired only when he knew he would hit. The other guerrillas began to trust him. They watched how he handled fear. Soon, they followed his lead in small groups, even before he was a formal leader. The war out here was personal for many of them, but for William, it was more than that. He was not just fighting the Union, he was fighting the world that took his father, and the world was not finished taking from him. In 1863, Union officers wanted to break the power of the guerrillas. One way they tried to do this was by going after the people who helped them. Many of those helpers were women. In Kansas City, Union forces arrested several women they believed were connected to guerrilla fighters. Some were sisters, cousins, and friends of men like William Anderson and other bushwhackers. Among the women held there were William's own sisters. They were locked inside a stone building that had been turned into a military jail. It was old and not built to hold so many prisoners. The walls were cracked. The floors were weak. But no one in charge seemed to care. Day after day, the women sat inside. They heard the sounds of wagons and soldiers outside. They waited for news. They waited for someone to decide their fate. Then, one day, the building gave way. Without warning, part of the jail collapsed. Stones crashed down. Boards broke. Dust filled the air. The women inside screamed as the roof and walls fell around them. When the dust cleared, the damage was clear. Some of the women were dead. Some were badly hurt. One of William Anderson's sisters was killed. Another was left crippled for life. News of the collapse spread quickly through the guerrilla camps. Some said the building had been weakened on purpose. Others said it was poor construction and too much weight. But to William and his comrades, there was only one truth. The Union had taken their fathers and brothers on the field. Now their sisters were dead or broken in a prison. For William, this was a deep and final cut. When he heard what had happened, men who were with him remembered the change in his face. He did not yell. He did not fall to his knees. He became quiet, almost cold. A line that had cracked inside him when his father died now snapped completely. The war was no longer just duty. It was no longer just revenge. It became something darker inside his heart. Something that did not know how to stop. In August 1863, Quantrill gathered his men for a large raid. Their target was the town of Lawrence, Kansas. Lawrence was known as a strong anti-slavery and pro-Union town. Many guerrillas believed men from Lawrence had taken part in raids into Missouri. To the bushwhackers, the town was not just a place on a map. It was the heart of their enemy. William rode with them. It was still dark when they approached the town. The riders moved in a long line, horses breathing hard, hooves beating a steady rhythm on the earth. Some men were nervous. Some were eager. William was focused. They reached Lawrence in the early morning. People were sleeping. Shops were closed. Children were in bed. The town was not ready for war, but war had come anyway. Quantrill's men spread out through the streets. Doors were kicked in. Men were dragged from their homes. Some were shot in front of their families. Houses were set on fire. Flames climbed into the sky. Smoke rolled over the town like a dark wave. The smell of burning wood and gunpowder filled the air. Horses ran wild. People cried out for help that did not come. William moved through this chaos like a man in his element. He is believed to have held lead groups from house to house. He showed no mercy to men he believed were enemies, or connected to the people who had hurt his family and his people. Some tried to run, some begged, but this was a raid built on years of hate, death, and loss. By the time it was over, around 150 to 180 men and boys from Lawrence were dead. Almost the entire town was in ruins. The raid would be remembered as one of the worst acts of guerrilla violence in the Civil War. For the Union, it was a massacre. For William and his fellow riders, it was revenge. Asterisk. The raid on Lawrence changed the war on the border. It also changed William Anderson himself. He had now seen what it meant to destroy a town. He had watched buildings fall and lives end in a single morning. He had heard the cries of families who had never held a gun, yet died in a war they did not start. A part of him might have felt the weight of this, but the louder voice inside him was the one that said the enemy deserved it. He thought of his father lying dead on the ground. He thought of his sister crushed in a broken building. He thought of his crippled sister living the rest of her life in pain. In his mind, Lawrence was not innocent. Lawrence was payment. After Lawrence, many guerrillas tried to keep some distance from the blood in their minds. They drank, they joked, they told big stories to cover the memories. But William seemed to lean into the fear he created. He began to show a side of himself that even other hard men noticed. He did not run from brutality. He walked straight into it. The name Bloody Bill began to grow stronger after this time. Each raid, each act of violence, wrapped him in a darker legend. Union soldiers heard the stories. Civilians whispered them. The name carried weight. Bloody Bill Anderson, a man who had lost too much to ever turn back. Asterisk. After the Lawrence raid, Quantrill's group began to split and spread out. The pressure from Union forces grew stronger. It became harder to move large bands of men without drawing attention. The war on the border shifted again into smaller, sharper attacks. This was the world where William Anderson stepped forward as more than just a fighter. He became a leader. Men who rode with him later said he was quick to act and slow to forgive. He led by showing that he would ride in front, not hide in the back. He took the same risks as the men under him. 4 tough fighters in a cruel war that mattered. His group became known for its speed, surprise, and harsh methods. They did not just fight soldiers. They hit patrols, supply lines, and sometimes civilians they believed, who were helping the Union. The war had given William Anderson everything he needed to become what history would remember: pain, hate, and a group of men willing to follow him into the fire. Soon, he would raise his own black flag. Soon, his name alone would be enough to break the courage of trained soldiers. Asterisk. After the raid on Lawrence, the war on the border changed again. Union forces pushed harder into Missouri. Patrols grew larger. Scouts searched every road and creek crossing. It became harder for guerrillas to move. But William Anderson did not slow down. In fact, he became more feared than before. He did not stay long with Quantrill after Lawrence. The guerrilla bands began to separate into smaller groups. The border was wide, and each leader needed room to strike and disappear. William rode with Jim and their closest men. Some were family, some were childhood friends, and others were young fighters who had already seen enough death to follow a leader like him without question. They rode light. They carried multiple pistols, knives, and sometimes captured rifles. They hid in woods, farm sheds, and river bottoms. They avoided big towns and stayed near friendly homes in the countryside. They moved like shadows, appearing where the Union least expected them. People who saw them ride said that William had changed. He was quieter than before. He looked past men when they spoke to him, as if he was seeing something far away. Some believed his mind was still trapped inside the jail collapse that killed his sister. Others said losing his father had carved something out of his heart that could never be filled again. Whatever the cause, William Anderson was no longer fighting to survive the war. He was fighting to break the people he blamed for his pain. This was when something new began to appear in stories about him. His riders began to use a black flag. A black flag meant no surrender and no mercy. It told the Union that if they tried to fight, there would be no prisoners, no safe escape, no turning back. A black flag meant death was the only ending. William Anderson did not invent the idea, but he used it in a way that made it terrible. When his men rode with a black flag, soldiers who might have fought chose instead to run or hide. Fear became a weapon, and William used it as often as he used a gun. His enemies started calling him Bloody Bill Anderson more often now. At first it was only a name whispered among Union groups. Soon, newspapers used it. Later, parents told their children to behave or Bloody Bill would come for them. He was becoming a figure larger than life, a symbol of the darkest side of the war. The raids grew harsher. The bodies left behind were more than evidence of a fight. Some showed signs of anger that went beyond battle itself. Union reports claimed that Anderson's men scalped their enemies, decorated saddles with hair, and rode with trophies from the dead. Some details may have been true. Some may have been spread to anger the Union soldiers or justify revenge. But the stories did their work. They made Bloody Bill a nightmare that soldiers carried with them. William lived in constant danger. Union troops searched for him everywhere. Missouri's fields, woods, and rivers filled with soldiers hoping to earn reward money or recognition by tracking him down. But he knew the land well. He knew every bend of the creek, every farm trail, every family that would hide him for a night. The border country was wild, and William moved through it like a man who belonged to it. His horses were fast, and he changed them often so no single animal became too tired to escape. His men trained themselves to fire pistols while riding at full speed. Some carried as many as 6 revolvers at once. They did not reload in the middle of a fight. They simply dropped an empty pistol in a saddle strap and grabbed another loaded one. This made them deadly in close battle, faster than most cavalry soldiers could imagine. It was during this time that Anderson grew close to a young guerrilla named Archie Clement. Archie was fierce and loyal. Some said he was even more wild than William. Archie admired him deeply, and soon he became one of Bloody Bill's strongest riders. The two men seemed to understand each other without many words. Pain had shaped both of them, and war gave them a place to release it. People in the countryside began to live with the fear that Bloody Bill might come to their door. If they supported the Union, they risked losing their home or their life. If they supported the South, they feared the Union Army's response. Everyone was trapped between fire and fire. William believed he was paying back what had been taken from him. In his mind, the Union was not just an army. It was a force that had destroyed his father and his sisters. Every raid, every burning home, every bullet was part of the same answer he had begun long ago. The war had become personal in a way that few men could fully understand. As months passed, Anderson's name spread farther. Union soldiers wrote letters home saying they hoped never to meet him. Some civilians left Missouri altogether, choosing to start new lives elsewhere rather than wait for another raid. William was not just one man. He was changing the shape of the border war itself. There were moments when William's men celebrated their escapes. They sang, they drank, and they told stories of raids. But even in these moments, riders noticed that William rarely smiled. His victories did not heal him. They only took him further away from any life he might have lived before the war. He had followers now. Men looked to him for decisions. His choices could lead them to safety or death. He carried this responsibility, but it did not soften him. Instead, it sharpened him like a blade drawn across stone. Then came the year 1864. The fighting grew even worse. Union pressure increased. Missouri waited for the next turn in a war that seemed endless. Bloody Bill Anderson was preparing for the event that would forever mark his name in American history. It would happen in a town called Centralia. It would involve a halted train and soldiers who never saw danger coming. It would become one of the most discussed and feared acts of guerrilla warfare in the entire Civil War. But at this moment in his story, as Part 4 closes, the black flag flies high above William Anderson's riders. The border war has made him into something no one can ignore. A leader, a hunter, a man who has already passed beyond the reach of mercy. The year was 1864, and the border country was filled with smoke, fear, and the sound of hooves on hard ground. Bloody Bill Anderson and his men had become a warning carried by the wind. Union officers held meetings about him. Soldiers prayed not to cross his path. Civilians locked their doors when they heard distant riding, but nothing that had happened yet would be remembered like the day he rode toward the small Missouri town called Centralia. It began as a morning that looked harmless. The sun was high enough to warm the fields. The air smelled of cut hay and dust. Centralia was not a strong fort or a large city. It was a railroad stop with a few streets, a hotel, a store, a blacksmith, and people who believed they knew what war looked like. They did not. William Anderson and about 70 to 80 men approached the town at speed. Their horses carried them like a dark wave moving across the land. Some wore pieces of Union clothing taken in earlier fights. Others wore old farm clothes. But what united them all was the symbol that rode with them: the black flag. People stopped and stared as the guerrillas entered Centralia. Some stepped back inside their homes or stores. Others tried to watch without being seen. The riders spread out, taking control of the streets. They knew what they wanted. A train was expected that day, and trains carried more than passengers. They carried mail, money, and sometimes soldiers. They waited. The train whistle came before the train itself. A long metallic cry rolled across the morning air. The ground shook under the iron wheels as it slowed and then stopped. Steam curled around the engine. Anderson and his men moved closer. Inside the train were Union soldiers. Some were returning from leave, heading back to duty. They had no idea what kind of danger waited for them outside. When the doors opened, they were pulled out, shocked and unprepared. There were nearly 24 soldiers, many still wearing pieces of uniform, though not all were fully armed. They stood in a line under the gun barrels of Anderson's men. Townspeople watched from windows, afraid to speak or move. William Anderson rode forward. His face did not show anger or excitement. It was calm, as if this moment was not strange to him, as if the world had led him to this exact place. He spoke to the captured soldiers. Some accounts say he demanded that they curse the Union and cheer for the Confederacy. Others say he questioned them about their officers and regiments. But whatever words passed between them, the ending was the same. The soldiers were not spared. Shots rang out. Bodies fell. Dust lifted around their boots as life left them. Some tried to run or shield another man. but it was over quickly. Where they had stood in a line, there was now only stillness and the smell of gunpowder. The ground of Centralia had become a grave before the day had even reached noon. The town was silent. Even the horses seemed to sense the weight of what had happened. But the day was not done as Anderson's men searched the train. Another sound reached them: hoofbeats, many of them coming fast. A Union force, larger than Anderson's group, was heading toward Centralia. They were angry. They had heard reports of guerrillas in the area and came to catch them. The riders with the black flag did not flee. They prepared. Anderson chose the ground carefully. His men waited in cover, using brush, fences, and broken terrain. The Union force rode in, confident because they had more men, more formal training, and believed that guerrillas would break and run. They were wrong. The moment was quiet before it exploded. Anderson's men fired first. Pistols barked like thunder. Smoke rolled over the field as riders appeared and vanished like ghosts. The Union men tried to form lines, but guerrilla bullets were already tearing through them. William Anderson rode straight into the center of the fight. His coat streamed behind him. His revolvers flashed again and again. His men followed him without hesitation. They had seen him survive too many battles to doubt him now. The Union force broke. Horses scattered. Soldiers fell or fled into the woods. The field belonged to the black flag. It is said that more than 100 Union men died that day, between the train and the battle that followed. The exact number is still debated, but the terror of Centralia spread across the country like wildfire. Newspapers printed stories of the attack. Union officers planned new ways to hunt Bloody Bill down. Civilians who once thought the war was far away now understood that it could arrive at any moment, furious and unstoppable. For Anderson, Centralia was not just another raid. It was a message built from fire and death. He had taken the war to a level that few could imagine and fewer could match. To him and his men, it was revenge on the world that had crushed their families and burned their homes. But revenge grows heavier each time it is fed. Some riders whispered that Bloody Bill slept less than before. Some said he would sit apart from the campfire and stare into nothing, as if seeing shapes that no one else could see. Others said he rode harder, driven by something even darker than hate. Centralia was the moment when William T. Anderson's name passed fully into legend. Not the legend of heroes, not the legend of noble warriors, but the legend told when men sit close to a fire and feel the woods watching them. After Centralia, there was no turning back. The war would end one day, but not for him. He was already too deep inside the storm. He had crossed too many lines. He could no longer be only a man. He had become a warning. He had become a story whispered with fear. That had become Bloody Bill Anderson, and the Union would now do everything in its power to stop him. After the Centralia attack, the world around William Bloody Bill Anderson changed forever. Before that day, he had been a name of fear in Missouri and Kansas. After Centralia, he became something more than a man. He became a target. Union officers held urgent meetings. Newspapers printed his name as if he were a storm that could cross state lines. Commands were written, riders were sent, scouts were paid. One order moved silently through the Union ranks: find Bloody Bill Anderson, catch him if possible, kill him if necessary. Union soldiers began searching the woods, roads, farms, and river crossings. Entire patrols moved only because someone thought they heard his riders. Some said you could tell if his men were near because the land suddenly felt too quiet, like the air itself was waiting for gunfire. People in Missouri lived with a new fear. If they helped the Union, they feared Anderson. If they helped Anderson, they feared the Union. No one felt safe. Anderson knew he was being hunted, but he did not slow down. He kept moving. He kept striking. He kept the black flag high. He and his men avoided large towns and military forts. They stayed in broken fields, low valleys, wooded hills, and abandoned farms. They slept in shifts, never all at once. They kept fresh horses hidden near safe houses so they could change animals quickly and disappear faster than the Union could follow. William trusted very few people. Even among his own riders, he watched carefully. Betrayal was common in the border war. A friend could turn to an enemy in a single night. But Anderson carried himself like a man who no longer feared what other men could do to him. He had already lost everything that truly mattered to him. Archie Clement stayed close to him during this time. Clement was younger, but many believed he was even more fierce. Riders said Archie looked at William the way a wild dog might look at a stronger one, loyal but ready to bite the world if needed. The two were often seen side by side, leading raids that made the Union shake. But not all of Anderson's men understood the path he was taking. Some warriors who had ridden with him before began to ask questions. There were rumors of arguments within the group. Some believed Anderson should strike only soldiers. Others wanted to limit the bloodshed. Some feared that the black flag had turned from a symbol of war into a symbol of cruelty. Yet most kept riding, because they believed leaving would mean death either from the Union or from the world they had helped create. The land around them was changing. Farms were burned. Families were displaced. Fields once used for wheat and corn were now battlegrounds, where bullets were easier to find than grain. Anderson rode through these places like a ghost tied to the violence. Men said he no longer looked back after a raid. He no longer paused before making decisions. He did not ask himself if another path existed at night. When the fires burned low and the riders whispered, some claimed that Bloody Bill had become the war itself. Not a part of it, not a soldier in it. The war. Meanwhile, Union forces continued to close in. One officer, Major Samuel Cox, began planning a way to trap Anderson. Cox had grown tired of chasing shadows, tired of burying men who never made it home. He believed that the only way to stop the raids, the burnings, and the fear was to end the life of the man at the center of it. Cox sent scouts to ask every farmer, trader, and traveler if Anderson had been seen. Some lied out of fear. Some told the truth out of anger. Slowly, pieces of information began to form a trail. Not a clear one, but enough to move closer. While the Union searched, Anderson struck again and again. He and his men hit wagon trains. They cut telegraph wires. They ambushed patrols, then vanished like smoke. But there were signs that something inside him was shifting. Some said he grew quieter. Some said he rode faster, as if trying to escape something inside his own mind. Others said he laughed at moments that would have made another man shiver. War had taken a toll on everyone. But on Anderson it was carving something deeper. As fall winds rolled across Missouri, leaves turned red like the stories told about him. Nights grew colder. The war was entering another season, and so was Bloody Bill. He rode as if the world had only one road left, and he was already halfway down it. Union soldiers sharpened their hunt. Local men were paid for information. Scouts followed hoofprints through creeks and mud. Cox waited for his chance. The border watched and held its breath. Bloody Bill Anderson, once a boy on a farm, once a grieving son, once a student of the land, was now moving toward the last pages of his story without knowing it. The black flag still waved, but even the darkest flag does not fly forever. Soon, he would ride into a place where the Union waited with rifles ready. Soon, the earth would shake under gunfire one last time. Soon, the hunters and the hunted would meet face to face. And when that day came, the legend of Bloody Bill Anderson would not end quietly. It would end in gunsmoke, in dirt, in the sound of soldiers shouting and horses screaming. And history would remember that ending for more than 100 years. Asterisk. The name Bloody Bill Anderson had spread far beyond Missouri. It crossed into newspapers, army camps, and towns that had never seen a guerrilla rider. To Union soldiers, his name meant danger. To frightened families, it meant the war was no longer somewhere else. It was here. It was on their roads. It was looking into their windows that the Union wanted the war to end. They wanted the fear to stop. They wanted to close the chapter on the guerrillas who ruled the shadows. And many believed that to stop the terror, one man had to fall. William Bloody Bill Anderson. After Centralia, his group moved often. They traveled through thick woods where the trees blocked out sunlight. They crossed streams and slept in brush so deep that a man could hide an arm's length away and never be seen. Their campfires were small, sometimes only glowing coals hidden under stones, so no smoke would reveal them. But each week, the circle around them grew smaller. Union scouts watched the trails more closely. Informers appeared in towns and farms. Some who once gave Anderson food or shelter became afraid to help him. Anderson noticed a change. His men noticed it too. They were still loyal, but they understood the risk was growing heavier, like a hand closing around their throats. Some riders asked Anderson if they should go south, deeper into Confederate territory. There, they could join regular forces, maybe find safety, but Anderson refused. Whether pride or vengeance guided him, no one could say for certain. He believed his fight belonged to Missouri. It was the land of his father, his sisters, and his suffering. He would not leave it. The nights around their camp grew colder. The horses breathed clouds of mist. Sometimes, when the wind was right, gunshots could be heard far away. The land was still alive with war, but the sound felt different now. It felt closer. Anderson's men said he changed again in these weeks. He spoke less. He stared at the fire longer. He woke at the smaller sound and reached for a pistol before his eyes were open. The war outside was large, but the war inside him was larger. He dreamed, some said, of the jail collapse that killed his sister. He dreamed of his father lying on the ground, eyes open and empty. He dreamed of soldiers from Centralia falling one by one. No one knows what he truly felt, only that every dawn, he rose harder than the dawn before. A rider brought news one morning. It was urgent and spoken quietly. Union militia under Major Samuel Cox was closing in. Anderson listened without blinking. He did not show fear, but he understood what it meant. Cox was not a man who chased shadows without patience. He was steady, determined, a hunter who knew he must be careful when facing wounded and dangerous prey. Some guerrillas suggested splitting up. Others said they should ride straight at Cox and scatter his men. Another said they should wait in the thick forest and strike from the dark. Anderson decided they would keep moving, not running, not hiding, just moving, the way a river moves between stones. But the land was changing. Cold rains turned roads into mud. Fields grew dark and heavy. Streams ran faster, cutting deeper channels. Tracks were easier to follow. They rode into an area near Albany, Missouri. They did not know it yet, but the Union knew this land better than they expected. Scouts had watched farmers who spoke to Anderson's men. Signs had been read in hoofprints and broken grass. Major Cox was not far behind. Anderson's men stopped near a cluster of trees. The wind shook the branches. They watered their horses and chewed cold food. There was no laughter now, only quiet breathing and the sound of metal clicking as weapons were checked. Some riders later said that Anderson looked different that day, as if he could feel something waiting for him beyond the trees. He adjusted his belt, checked his pistols, and sat with his back against a log. His eyes moved from man to man, not judging them, but remembering them. They had followed him through everything, through fire, through fear, through death. And now, they would ride again as they mounted up. Archie Clement grinned the way he always did before trouble. He rode close to Anderson and said something no one fully heard. Whatever it was, it made Anderson give the smallest nod, the kind of nod men give when they have already chosen their path. They rode out. The land stretched ahead, wide and open in places, narrow and wooded in others. A hawk crossed the sky. Hoofbeats echoed under the cold autumn sun. Then came the sound, not hoofbeats, not wind, gunfire. It snapped across the field. Horses jerked. Men reached for their pistols. Anderson pulled back hard on his reins and turned his head. Smoke rose beyond a line of brush. The hunt was no longer distant. It was here. Union militia had found them. The riders wheeled around, forming a loose line. Anderson rode to the front, black flag behind him. His coat snapped in the wind. His pistols shone in his hands. This was no ambush he had chosen. This was the moment he had ridden toward from the day his father fell. He looked at the men around him. They were bruised by war, sharpened by loss, and ready to follow him into whatever waited beyond the next gunshot. Then he lowered his head, leaned forward in the saddle, and gave the command. They charged. The end was coming. The shot that would change history was waiting. But the story was not finished yet. The charge began like a storm rolling down from dark hills, fast and frightening. Bloody Bill Anderson and his men rode forward, pistols tight in their hands, horses pounding the earth. Their long coats snapped in the wind, and the black flag followed them like a shadow made of cloth and fear. The Union militia was waiting. Major Samuel Cox had prepared his men well. They were not scattered or surprised. They had taken good positions, hidden along fences, behind trees, and in small patches of brush. Their rifles were loaded. Their nerves were steady. They knew who they were facing, and they knew what would happen if they failed. The first shots were loud enough to shake the air. Bullets cut through leaves and dirt. Anderson's riders spread out, firing their pistols as they advanced. Smoke lifted around them, and for a moment, they disappeared inside it like riders out of a nightmare. This was not the kind of fight William Anderson preferred. He was a master of ambush, surprise, and fast strikes. But here, the Union had the advantage. They could see their targets. They had longer rifles that fired farther than pistols. They had learned from They knew the cost of letting the black flag get close. Anderson leaned low over his horse's neck and fired one pistol, then another. He rode as if bullets could not touch him. Archie Clement was close beside him, yelling words that mixed with gunfire. The riders behind them kept coming, but the Union rifles did not stop. A horse stumbled. A rider fell. Another guerrilla shouted in pain. The battle turned into chaos. Cox's men aimed carefully. Many had lost friends at Centralia and had sworn to never let Bloody Bill escape. They fired again and again, and the field began to lean toward the Union. Yet Anderson refused to pull back. He was a man who believed retreat was worse than death. He pushed forward, pistols empty, reaching for others at his belt. His horse lunged through mud, and he raised himself to fire again. A Union bullet struck close to his saddle, cutting through the leather. Another bullet tore past his coat. The wind changed, and smoke cleared enough for the militia to see him clearly riding in front, fearless, his long dark hair flying back. Someone shouted, "There, that's Anderson." More rifles lifted, more barrels aimed. The next shots were not wild or rushed. They were the shots of men who knew what killing him would mean for the war. One bullet hit William Anderson in the head. For a moment, he did not fall. He stayed upright, as if held by some force that refused to let him go. Then his body slid sideways, and he dropped from the saddle into the cold. Broken grass. His horse kept running without him. The riders nearest him saw it happen. Some cried out. Archie Clement yelled and fired wildly as if his voice could pull Anderson back to his feet. A few guerrillas turned their horses toward where he had fallen, trying to reach him. But the Union fire was too strong. The black flag lowered. Some of Anderson's men turned and escaped into the trees. Others fell where they fought. The battle did not last long after that. Without their leader, the force that had once ridden like a hammer through Missouri began to break apart. When the gunfire ended, soldiers moved across the field. They found bodies, broken weapons, and the torn shape of the man they had hunted for so long. Union militia gathered around him. Some stared in silence. Some felt a weight lift from their hearts. Others felt only sadness, seeing not a legend, but a man who had once been a boy with a family and a future. They searched his coat and pockets. They found photographs, small and worn, showing faces of those he had loved. They found pistols, all marked by use, and belts decorated with hair that made men look away. The Union soldiers carried his body to Albany, Missouri. There, more people gathered to see the man whose name had lived on their tongues like a curse. Some cheered, some crossed themselves, some simply stared, unsure how one man could cause so much fear, and yet look so quiet in death. Photographs were taken, proof that the long chase was over. The body was displayed to show that Bloody Bill Anderson would ride no more. The black flag that had flown so fiercely was gone. News moved quickly across Missouri and Kansas. Some celebrated, some whispered that it was not really him, that he would return with fire and gunshots and riders behind him, but he did not return. War had taken him just as it had taken so many others. Archie Clement and a few surviving riders swore they would continue fighting, and some did, but none could carry the legend the way Anderson had. None could replace the fear his name created. The war went on, but something had changed. The Union believed a dark chapter was closing. The border, scarred and burned, tried to take a breath again. Families looked out their doors and hoped the night would be quieter. In time, history argued about him. Was he a monster made by rage? Was he a victim shaped by a brutal land? Was he a soldier, an outlaw, or something between? People could not agree. They still cannot. But they remember him. They remember the black flag. They remember They remember the man who rode at the front, unafraid of death, until death finally took him. The story was not finished yet, but the rider who began it would never speak again. When the echoes of gunfire faded at Albany and the dust settled above the grass where he fell, the story of Bloody Bill Anderson did not end. A dead man does not ride again, but a name can travel farther than any horse, and William Anderson's name began its own journey through memory, fear, and legend. His body was taken into town, lifted by men who had hunted him for months. They carried him not as a prisoner, not as a soldier, but as a symbol that the border war might finally change. People came from houses, farms, and nearby towns to see him. Even those who had never met him felt something when they stood near the man, whose story had filled the land with dread. Some stared in silence, studying the stillness in his face. Some whispered prayers, uneasy even in victory. Some gazed without emotion, as if looking at a wild animal finally caught. And some, too many perhaps, laughed or spit, forgetting that war had turned him into what they feared. A photographer was brought in. He arranged the body so that no one would doubt who lay there. Pictures were taken and shared across Missouri. Union soldiers passed them around saying the nightmare was over. Newspapers printed his death as proof that justice had come. But justice on the border was never simple. Men wondered if killing Anderson would stop the raids or only stir more hatred. Women remembered towns burned and sons lost and were not sure if any death could balance such pain. And children listened at doorways to grown-ups telling stories about him with voices that trembled. Even when they claimed to be glad, no one could agree on who he had truly been. To some, he was a murderer who used the war to disguise cruelty. To others, he was a son shaped by sorrow, a brother twisted by the jail collapse that killed his sister, a man driven by things no one else had felt. And to a few, he was still a hero who fought for a cause they believed was right. The truth was not simple, and history rarely is. Not far away, the riders who escaped the battle gathered in secret places. Among them was Archie Clement, still young, still fierce, still loyal to the man he had followed. He spoke to the others, his voice sharp with anger and grief. Some said they should attack, burn, and avenge their leader. Some said they should leave Missouri and disappear before the Union caught them too. None of them trusted the world anymore. They remembered the calm face of William Anderson before each raid. They remembered his silence by the fire, the way he rode in front, the way he did not fear death. They remembered the black flag, flying like a shadow with weight and meaning. And they wondered what the world would do with the story of that flag now. Archie Clement and a few riders swore they would continue what Anderson began. They would not surrender. They would not kneel. The war was still burning in them. And even after the Civil War ended months later, some of those men kept fighting, refusing to live under any flag except the black one they carried in their hearts. Meanwhile, people far from the border read about Bloody Bill Anderson and shook their heads. They could not understand how a man could become so fierce. They asked why his rage had grown so large, why he had chosen the path of darkness and steel. But those questions had answers only the border could understand. The border was a land where families were torn apart not by strangers, but by neighbors. A land where a man could leave home and return to find nothing but ashes. A land where the law changed every mile and every night. And in such a place, anger did not need help to grow. It only needed time. William Anderson did not create that world. He was created by it. In the months after his death, some wrote that his story should be forgotten. They said his name should disappear so no one could admire him. They wanted him erased so children would never imagine becoming like him. But others kept his name alive. They told stories of his speed, his skill, and his unbroken will. They spoke of him as a symbol of the war's cruelty and the price paid by those who lost too much. They told of a young man who once had a future, and how the war took it from him piece by piece, until all that was left was a rider with a black flag and a heart that no longer knew peace. And so, he became a legend. Not a legend of glory, not a legend of honor, a legend of warning. If you look into the dark places of history, you will find his name waiting, not to frighten, but to remind. The world learns very slowly, and sometimes it learns through men like Bloody Bill Anderson, men who show what happens when grief becomes fire, and fire becomes a life. Years turned into decades. The war became a memory told by old men on porches and written in history books. The nation healed in some places and stayed wounded in others. Towns were rebuilt, fields grew wheat again where horses once bled. But the story did not vanish. Writers wrote books. Historians argued. Ballads were sung quietly in small places where people still remembered the border war. And each time the story was told, the question returned: was he born a devil, or did the world make him one? No answer ever satisfied everyone, but one truth remained. He was human, and something inside him broke when his family was taken. What rose after that was a man the world was not ready to understand. And even after death, he did not rest easily, not in history, not in memory, not in the voices that still speak his name. Bloody Bill Anderson, the man who rode with the black flag, the man made of pain and steel, the man the war refused to forget. The war ended, but the shadow of Bloody Bill Anderson did not fade with the gunfire. Across Missouri, Kansas, and beyond, men and women still spoke his name in low voices, as if he might return riding out of the tree line with pistols in his hands and the black flag behind him. Time moved on, yet his story stayed, like smoke that refuses to leave the air. Farmers rebuilt their homes, trains began to run again through places where the tracks had once been soaked in fear. Soldiers went back to families they had not seen in years. New roads were made, new laws were shaped, but the memories did not leave. They lived inside the land, deep and quiet, like seeds under soil. People told stories to explain who he had been, but with each telling, the story changed a little. A new detail was added. Another detail was forgotten. His life became a trail of questions that no one could follow to the end. Some said he was always dangerous, a man born to violence. Some said he had been a good boy, until the world took his family and crushed his heart. Others said he became the very thing he hated, and the war finished what grief began. Children who had never seen the war listened to the stories and imagined a rider with long hair, dark eyes, and a horse that carried lightning in its hooves. They imagined a ghost of the border who could not be touched by bullets until the very last day. But grown men, old soldiers, and quiet widows remembered a different truth. The war did not choose sides based on goodness. It destroyed whatever stood in its way. And William Anderson was one of the things the war destroyed, even before he died. As years passed, history tried to arrange the pieces of his life into something that made sense. Books were written. Newspapers revisited the events. Historians argued in long paragraphs in quiet rooms. Yet the man behind the name remained hard to see clearly. Was he a rebel captain defending his land? Was he an outlaw who used a broken world to hide his crimes? Was he a grieving son, blinded by revenge? Was he all of these things at once? No single answer stayed firm for long. What people did agree on was this: the border war had shaped him, and he had shaped a border war in return. Without him, some believed the violence might not have reached so far. Without the violence, some believed he might have remained only William, a man working a small piece of Missouri soil, instead of Bloody Bill, a man who turned that soil red. When his name was spoken, it carried a warning. War does not always turn boys into heroes. Sometimes it turns them into storms. In the decades after his death, others tried to claim parts of his legend. Outlaws such as Jesse James and his brother Frank rode through Missouri, and some whispered that they learned from Anderson's raids. They had seen what fear could do. They had seen what a name could become. The era of the Wild West grew, and stories of gunfighters filled saloons, newspapers, and later the moving pictures. Some writers tried to push Anderson into the same line as those men, but he never fit neatly into those tales. He belonged to something darker, something older, something rooted in anger that came long before the West became a frontier of cowboys and sheriffs. His name stayed in the corners of American history, not celebrated, not forgotten, but waiting. Like a door people were afraid to open. In small museums, his picture sometimes appeared, staring at viewers with a calm expression that did not reveal what storms once lived behind his eyes. Some stood in front of those photos longer than expected, as if trying to understand how a single life could carry so much sorrow and leave so much fear. And every so often, a new writer, researcher, or filmmaker found his story again. They followed the pieces, the documents, the memories, the graves, and the stones that still bear scars from fires set long ago. They tried to understand. Some believed they succeeded. Some walked away knowing they had not even come close, because the truth sat behind everything, quiet and patient. The story of Bloody Bill Anderson was not only about him. It was about a land that lost itself. It was about families destroyed, justice broken, and hatred turned into a language spoken with guns. And so, his life remains a warning that the world repeats when dark times rise. when people begin to see each other as enemies, when neighbors turn against neighbors, when revenge becomes easier than forgiveness, someone like him can be born again. Not the same name, not the same time, but the same shape held inside a different life. And that is why the story remains. Some tell it to remember the danger of war. Some tell it to honor those lost. Some tell it because they believe his rage was justified. Some tell it because they fear someone like him could rise again. The truth is that no one fully owns the story. It belongs to the land where it happened. It belongs to the families who lived through it. It belongs to history, and history carries its weight. William Anderson's final ride ended in a field under gray Missouri sky, but his shadow did not fall with him. It stayed, stretched across the years, and reached into new generations, a shadow made of pain, of brokenness, of choices that could never be undone. The man died. The legend did not. It still rides in the places where memory and fear sit together, and so, his final legacy is this: wars end, but what they create inside the human heart can last far longer than any bullet, any battle, or any flag. Some names remind the world to be careful with its anger. One of those names is Bloody Bill Anderson.